this webinar, because of our special relationship with the Foundation Center for the Philanthropy Insight tool, made in part due to a grant from the Robert W. Woodruff Foundation. What we're going to be covering here is that how to use the Philanthropy Insight tool. You do have to have access to that tool, and I'm going to let Joanne cover that because our members have free access to that, and there are other ways that you, if you are not a member in FECF, that you can gain that access. And Joanne, if you will go ahead and take over and explain that, I would appreciate it.
Okay, great. Thank you for inviting me today. As Helen said, I want to talk with you about Philanthropy Insight and also e-grant reporting, a way that foundations can help get their information into the databases more quickly. This tool, Philanthropy Insight, is available to the Southeastern Council members with this partnership we have. And the other ways that anyone can get access to it would be by subscription, or anyone can get free access to this tool at any of the 5 Foundation Center locations around the country, which is New York, Atlanta, Washington, Cleveland, and San Francisco. And in addition to that, we have over 470 locations around the country where anyone can get free access to our Foundation Directory Online database and also this Philanthropy Insight tool. So it's available in those ways. Okay? So let me go ahead and just make sure we're on the same page here. We have a few screens, and then I'm going to get online and show you how it works. Philanthropy Insight is it's an interactive mapping tool. So it combines the Foundation Center's data on grant makers and grants with Google Maps. So you can see who funds what, where. And you can customize your maps in a variety of ways to see what you would like on a map. So it allows you to plot the locations of the grant makers and the recipients on maps. So it'll show up little green pins for the grant makers and little orange pins for the recipients. It also lets you view aggregated data in different ways, by county, for example, by congressional district. And so seeing that aggregated data is pretty helpful. And then the other thing that you can do with it is overlay on the maps where you've already seen where the grant makers and the grants are. If you'd like, you can, on top of that, put some demographic information. And so I'll show you how this works. And the way, why would you be using this? How can grant makers use it? Basically, it demonstrates the scope and the reach of the funding. It kind of helps to see it visually. You may be familiar with all the grants that have been given, but seeing it on the map sometimes just makes it, helps us make some connections that maybe we wouldn't have made. It makes the funding gaps maybe a little more obvious, so you can see where the needs would be. It may be an option to get an idea of who else is giving and what nonprofits have been funded, so potentially identify some partners, and just to generally increase knowledge in the field. As I said, I'm going to get online, but this is just a screenshot here to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. You get a menu where you select what you want to see on your maps. And this is bringing up the topic of data, where the information comes from. But this is a snapshot of what choices you'll make. And then this slide is a result, where on the map you'll see the green pins for the grant makers and the orange pins for the recipients. And this screen here is a screen of a partial record from Foundation Directory Online, our main database that is searched primarily by grant seekers, I would think. the information here is fuller. You get more detailed information on if you're searching Foundation Directory online. But the data to put together both of these tools comes from the same place. And so that brings up the question of where the data comes from and how we can provide more data. The partnership that the Southeastern Council and the Foundation Center are working on is also to encourage grant makers to report electronically, because right now the data primarily comes from the 990PF. That's the primary source of the data that's on these on both of these tools. And as you know, there's a bit of a time lag when we're relying on the 990PF. And also, the grant data is not totally comprehensive. The data does not include every single grant that was ever given. The main grant makers that have their grants included right now are grant makers with a total giving of over $5 million, and their grants of over $10,000 are what's mainly included. There's also an assortment of grants from grant makers that are less than $5 million in giving. So that's why the way to enhance that or to get more data in the database is if grant makers send in their data electronically. And so if the grant makers do that, then we'll get faster. Of course, the information can come in much more quickly instead of relying on the 990PF, which will give more complete data so that the tools, Philanthropy Insight, for example, will have more data, so you'll be better able to identify the funding gaps and trends. The maps will be improved. And again, it'll be basically a better understanding of philanthropy, especially for the Southeast. So that's the other part of this project, is to encourage you to e-report. And so the way that you do that is pretty straightforward. It's basically using whatever you have now to compile your data on grants that were given. And probably Excel, just using a spreadsheet, is what a lot of funders do. Some may have grants management software that they use, so either of those will work. And then it's just a matter of emailing in those files whenever it's convenient. You can do it as often as you'd like. Monthly, quarterly, once a year is fine, or some choose to do it after a board meeting, so whenever it's convenient. And this slide here is just showing some of those software producers that have grant management software that may make it a bit easier to pull out a report on the grants that were given. So that's the basic idea here, is to encourage funders to send in their grant reports electronically, so we have more data. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get online now. So you should be seeing right now the Southeastern Council's page. This is the page you'll see if you have logged in as a member. And right there on the main page of this SECF website, right on the left-hand side on the bottom, you'll see a link that says Philanthropy Insight. When you click that, if you're logged in, this is the page you get.
Joanne, we're not seeing the page.
Okay. Let's see.
And again, if you're a member in SECF, you do have your membership gains you free access to Philanthropy Insight. If you're not a member in the Southeastern Council of Foundations, there you can purchase access to it, or there is free access available at any of their sites. And Joanne, I believe the page did just come up.
Okay, good.
Shot.
Thanks.
Great.
So this is the page. I wanted to point it out because it's got the basic info on here. It also, right at the top, there's a guided tour. This is just a 5-minute little tour. So if you have some colleagues that were not on the webinar today and don't know anything about what this Philanthropy Insight is, they might want to just take that tour. And it also has a reminder of what it does. The other thing is towards the bottom of the page here, there's this information on e-reporting. And there's a link to a page on the Foundation Center's website which will give you that Excel spreadsheet to tell you what you need to send in, what's included. And I'll tell you, it's the basics information about your grants. And the name of the grant, the city, the state, the amount, the year. That's the basic. If you can send some more description, that would be helpful, like population groups served, fields of activity, that sort of thing. But I'll be glad to also answer questions. I guess we usually wait to ask the questions, but if you have a burning question, you can ask it as we go along. So also right here in the first paragraph, it just says click here to access. So that's all you do. You don't have to put in a password. You've put in your SECF password, and that gets you access to Philanthropy Insight. And the main way that you get in here is over here on the left it says change map parameters. And here's your basic menu of what do you want to map. And so you make your choices. The first choice is grants or grant makers. You can select one of those. Let's start with grant makers. Then your next choice is, do you want to see the map, the little pins on the map? So I'll check that box and we'll see green pins for the grant makers. Then you select an indicator about those grant makers, like total giving, total assets, number of grant makers, and so forth. So let's just choose total giving. Then your next choice, if you would like, you can narrow it down by subject. At this point, I'm just going to leave that open to all just to give you an idea of, this is an actual question that has come up, which is basically how much giving by congressional district. So the next choice, Geographic Focus, I chose the U.S. map. Once I chose the U.S. map, then I get a listing of the 50 states. I just chose Alabama. Once you choose a state, then you see several options for display. County, city, metro area, congressional district, zip code, and so forth. So let's say congressional district. So it's just a matter of making those choices, and then every time you want to get the map, I clicked Refresh Map. And here comes my result. Here's Alabama divided into the congressional districts. And when you mouse around, you see the congressional district totals. You'll also see the little green pins, which are indicating grant makers. If you click on a pin, you'll get the profile for each funder. The other way you can do that, over here on the right where it says Data View, if you click on that, it brings up the list of the grant makers in the state. And you can I just clicked on a grant maker. Here's the Abrams Charitable Foundation. It's the basic information about them as a grant maker. That's their profile. This list here, it is alphabetically sorted right now. You can click on any column and resort that list. So I just clicked, and now the one with the largest total giving is at the top. You can put it into a spreadsheet format or print or save the list if you'd like. And then I'll just close that, and we're back at our map. The other data view is by congressional district. And again, that's where I was talking about the aggregate of the total giving. And also, of course, if you put it in a spreadsheet, you could get the total for the whole state. So that's basically it. Now, once you've seen something, then you want to say, okay, I want to see something else. I want to change this. So I'll hit Change Map Parameters, and I'm back at everything that I selected. If you just want to make a slight change, you might want to, for example, go to the Grantmaker Filters. And if you notice, there were several public charities on the list because we do include grant-making public charities. If you said, I don't want to include those, I want to take those out of my map, the way you do that, I'm going here to the list of grantmaker types, and I'm going to click on the ones that I do want. So in effect now, public charity is not checked. So if I refresh the map again, it will have not included those. And as the Southeastern Council saw, this getting information by congressional district was helpful for Foundations on the Hill. I'm going to go back to the Change Map Parameters. And if you want to make several changes, you might want to just hit Clear and just start from scratch. And that way you'll know you'll know what you're asking for. You know what you're telling it to map. So if we go, let's just stick with grant makers. Let's say we want to see the pins. I'm going to check that box. Maybe we want to see the number of grant makers. So I chose that indicator. Under fields of interest, you can just check a box. If you check the little, if you click on the plus, then it is broken into smaller categories. If you, which by checking the top box, they're all included. Let's say you want the U.S. map. This time, let's say Tennessee by county. And I'm just going to refresh that map. And here's the grant makers in education in Tennessee. And I'm sure we kind of expected. They're clustered around the larger areas: Memphis, Nashville, Knoxville, Chattanooga. Since it is Google Maps, you can zoom in. There's also up at the top, there's a little box. If I wanted to zoom to Memphis, for example, I just typed in Memphis, and then that got me there. And you could get down to the street level. It's still showing you by county, since that's what we asked for, was grant makers by county. So right now we're all in, it's still showing us Shelby County where Memphis is. If I go over here to that data view, here's all the counties with the number of grant makers that say they're interested in education. And the other list data view here was just the total list. Okay. The other way to look at a map, I'll go ahead and clear it just to be safe here. Your other choice was back at the top here, grant makers or grants. Let's choose grants. And here, again, you can say, I want to see the little pins, the green pins for the grant makers and the orange pins for the recipients. Then you select your indicator, which in this case are different. You could still see number of grant makers. You might want to see number of recipients, number of grants, or total grant amount. Let's say total grant amount. let's say for the subject area, environment. For the U.S. map, let's choose North Carolina. And then we can just leave it at county. And I'll just refresh that map. And so here is our list by county. And you'll notice in addition to the green Grantmaker buttons, there's orange ones. So I clicked on one, which happened to be for the Central Carolina Community College Foundation. They're a recipient. And so here's the information about them as a nonprofit. The grantmaker that gave them the grant was the Triangle Community Foundation. Here's the profile for that funder, plus the list of other grants that the Triangle Community Foundation has given, which could lead you, again, if you clicked, you would get to other recipient profiles. If you clicked on over here on the total number of grants, and again, this was under the topic of environment. So here's an example. I clicked on Blue Ridge Environmental Defense League. They're the recipient. Under grant, here's the details on that grant. It's basically who got the grant, who gave the grant, how much, what was it for, and when was it given. So that's the grant detail that you can drill down to. And again, you just keep closing your windows. If you want to put it in a spreadsheet or a list, you can. If you want to resort these lists, you can do that. And I hope you're kind of getting the idea that there's a lot of information here. Again, you could zoom in on a particular part of the state or county, or look at the, let's see. This is the data view. The other view, I don't think I showed you this one. Now this list here has got all three parts to it. It's got, the first thing you see is the list of grant makers. The next thing would be the list of recipients. And then the other way you can sort this is if you'd like to see it by individual grant. And again, anything that's linked, you just click on those to get to those more detailed lists, more the profiles. Okay, I'll do one more example and then give you some time for questions. This, I'll go ahead and clear it. Again, sometimes if you just hit refresh and think you're going to make one change, you end up leaving a criteria in there from your last map that you didn't mean to leave. So if you're going to make several changes, I'd say just go ahead and clear it. So let's say we're going to, again, look for grants. We want to see on the map the grant makers and the recipients with their little green and orange pins. Let's again just go ahead and look at total grant amount. Let's choose health as the subject. On the U.S. map, let's go ahead and choose Georgia. And we can select congressional district. Let's get that on the map. Again, this is similar to what we have seen before, except it's by congressional district. You can zoom to an area, you can click on a little orange pin for recipient info, click on a green one for the Grantmaker profile. The data view will show up as we saw before with a list of grantmakers, recipients, and grants that can be sorted. The data view is by congressional district. I know these are too small for you to see, so I'm going over kind of quickly. But the other feature that you can also do when you have the grants up is you might want to layer in a demographic indicator. So I opened that list up, and again, if there's a plus, I click on health, for example, and here you see an idea of the other kinds of indicators you might choose. So under health, we see things like infant mortality rate, child deaths per 100,000, child immunization rate, practicing physicians, people without health insurance, Medicare enrollment, Medicaid, children on Medicaid, diabetes, obesity, teenage births, tobacco consumption. So those are the kinds of things that can be layered on here. And all these different types of demographic indicators come from a variety of sources, including the American Human Development Project of the Social Science Research Council, of course, the Census Bureau. We have a couple that are more international. We're trying to get more international data in here. So that's where they come from, a variety of sources. So I'll just click people without health insurance. I'm going to refresh that map. So now, in addition to what we saw before, which was the grant amounts by congressional district and where the recipients and the grant makers are located, we also see the shading. And the shading is where has layered on top of there the information about people without health insurance. And so if you mouse over it, you can see, okay, for this Congressional District 1 in Georgia, you see the total grant amount and you see the percentage of people without health insurance. There's a key to the shading over here. So that data view shows up. And again, it could be sorted. If I click on that column of people without health insurance, we see the highest percentage of people without health insurance are in Congressional District 4, and you see the grant amount. It's a matter of just having more information. Of course, interpretation is up to what you bring to it. This isn't interpreting, it's just actually displaying the data. The data view by congressional district, again, is by congressional district. It has added in there, along with the total, the people without health insurance demographic, demographic info. And then the data view here was the same. So that's a bit of, several examples. I hope that you could see it fairly clearly on your screen. Are there some questions that you have?
So no one has a question? How about a comment? Has anyone used PINs previous to this webinar? PINs being Philanthropy Insight?
The other thing I can show, just if what people are maybe thinking about their questions, if you'd like, I can show the information about electronic grant reporting. Just to show you how you get to that and what's involved. So I'm back here at the Southeastern Council's Philanthropy Insight page. Down at the bottom, on the section on e-reporting, there's a link to this page, which has more info about, how to become an e-reporter, what's involved. And again, towards the bottom it says, learn more about submitting your grants data. And this is that list of partners, but there's also a link here to those standards. Here's the ones that I mentioned. There's an actual spreadsheet that you can see what you need to fill out, and I will say that the spreadsheet has several columns, and you might think, oh, that's a lot of work, that's a lot to fill out, but you don't have to fill out everything. The more you send, it would be great, but there's only a few required fields, which are highlighted here, and they're listed here. So as I said, they're pretty much the basic information you would have about your grants anyway. A couple of things that would be helpful that if you can to send that are not absolutely listed as required, but they're very much recommended. One of those would be geographic area served, because if you noticed on the map, what we were showing was where the nonprofit was located, and that's not always where the grant was actually serving. An example is all the grants that go to the American Red Cross are going to show up as Washington, D.C., but the purpose of the grant may have been for something specific, like Hurricane Sandy, for example. So it's going to be very helpful, especially when we're looking at maps, if we can get from the Grantmakers geographic area served, if indeed it was for some particular area. Also, population group served would be helpful in the field of activity. But basically, anything that Grantmakers can send in will be helpful, especially for the Southeast.
This is Barbara Alford in Alabama. I have a question for you.
Okay.
When I do a search on the map, what is the time frame for the information that comes back? If it says there's X amount of grants in my state or in my congressional district or whatever, from when to when?
Oh, I didn't show that. Thanks for asking. I just left it at the default, which was from 2008 to 2013 that's the realm of possibility. It doesn't mean we have that for every grant maker, especially the most current. 2013 would most likely only be coming from grant makers that are sending them in electronically.
So if it shows, just for example, $40 million in health grants in my congressional district, that would be from 2008 till now?
Yes. The other thing to keep in mind is what data is included right now. And right now, primarily, it is showing the grant makers with assets of more than $5 million. And so unless funders, grant makers have electronically reported, then the rest of what we have in there is what we call an assortment of other grants. The Foundation Center has tried to include more grants for those grant makers that have less than $5 million in assets so that we get a better picture, but that is not a complete listing. So it's not meant to be a comprehensive list of every single grant that was ever given. The more data we can include, the more representative it will be, but it doesn't have every single grant in there right now.
Thank you.
Just to add, the default time frame that it searches for, I believe, is 2010 to the present. So grants from 2008 and 2009, if you don't add those years, won't be included. I think that specifically came up in the case of Wiregrass because it has the data from 2008 and 2009, but not after. So if you don't add those years to the search, then that grant, the grant making of that foundation won't.
It is a choice over here under advanced options. If you choose grants as your choice, then under grant filters, that's where the listing of grants is. And yes, you can always take a look at how over here on the right, when you're seeing the map, it tells you what choices were used. And so sometimes, if you want to change those, you can. If you want to add additional years, you can go here to do that. Or, like I said, just take a look to make sure that it's showing what you want it to show.
Thank you.
Sure. I'd say, like anything else, it's the best way to see what it does is to take some time and just sit down and do some searches on it. Take a look, and that way you'll see what it does, what it doesn't do, how it might be of most use to you. So let's see. I just want to make sure we have time to do a bit of wrap-up. This is the contact information. Of course, Helen's contact info is there for questions about anything about Southeastern Council membership benefits, Philanthropy Insight, anything about SECF. Helen's contact is listed there. If you have some more specific questions about actually starting to do this e-grant reporting, the person's name here, Katie Nyheisel, she's in our New York office of the Foundation Center. We've listed her phone number and her email address there.